I'm Alistair from Hunger Hush. Come inside, we're gonna make a strawberry rhubarb pie. Not actually all that many ingredients you need for it. We have some good rhubarb here, picked fresh from the garden. We're gonna chop off the leaves and the end of the stalk and just use the body of it. And then we have some strawberries gotten as fresh as you can from the store. And we have some lard here as well. Tender flakes, my favorite to use, but any good lard. In terms of dry ingredients, you're just gonna need some all-purpose flour. I would not use whole wheat for pie dough. I don't think it's quite as good. You also need some sugar for a good amount of sugar for all your pie filling. And then some salt, just a pinch. And you're gonna want at least 2 big mixing bowls, one for the filling and one for making up the dough. You'll need a couple measuring cups, got a 1/4 cup and a whole cup here. Pie plates, if you're gonna give pies to anyone, you're gonna wanna make them in the pie plates, otherwise you're taking your glass bowls everywhere. And then a good solid cutting surface for getting all the fruit chopped. Finally, I just have a rolling pin for rolling out the pie dough. And a pastry cutter is kind of, there's no nice way to put lard into flour, but this is about as clean as you can do it. Okay, now that we have all our ingredients ready, let's get down to business. Pie! We're gonna make our filling first in the order, just because once we get all the sugar and the flour on the fruit, it'll take some time to absorb and get all delicious. When it comes to chopping the rhubarb, you're gonna wanna take the leaves off a couple centimeters below the stalk, and the leaves can just be discarded. And then do the same thing at the bottom. As it starts to get kind of knobby here, you'll wanna chop that off. And in terms of actually chopping this, you'll wanna do pieces about 1/2 centimeter to 1 centimeter, not too big, not too small. And there's the outside skin of the rhubarb. It's perfectly fine, you can leave that on, but it makes it a little bit harder to chop rather. So if it gets kind of stringy, don't worry about that. Okay, now that we're done with our rhubarb, it's time to get our 1 cup of strawberries chopped up. With the strawberries, it's pretty simple. Top comes off them. And then the way you actually chop them up depends on the size of the pieces you want inside the pie. I find smaller pieces of strawberries is better for this. So you can just slice it into large slices to start with. And then when we're finished, I'm gonna finely chop them up just using a rocking motion. We're gonna need our flour and sugar for this part. We're gonna add a 1/4 cup of flour to our filling, and we're also gonna add the sugar we need to make it sweet. Now for a combo pie, it's a bit trickier. A rhubarb pie just by itself, you'd probably want about 1.5 to even 2 cups of sugar, but because you have the strawberries for sweetness, you're gonna want a bit less. It's really up to taste. So at this point, I would add 1 cup of sugar to start with, and then after that, you can continue adding a bit of sugar once the filling's all soaked up. As a final piece, we're gonna add a little bit of lime juice to it. For a strawberry rhubarb pie, lime's the best. You can also do lemon if you're doing blueberry pies, and either a real lime or if you just have some lime juice, that's fine too. We're all done with the sugar for now, and we're gonna leave our pie filling off to the side to get all juicy. At this point, we can also preheat our oven to 475. It takes a fair amount of time to get up to that high a temperature, so while our pie dough is being made, the oven's getting all ready. For our pie dough, we're adding 3 cups of flour. We'll throw a pinch of salt in, mix it all together, and then cut our lard in kind of slowly. We need 1 cup of the lard, and inside each package, if you divide it just nicely in half, that's about a cup. So it's real easy that way. The only thing you want to watch is don't just put the lump of lard in and try and cut it in that way. It'll take forever. So we're going to chop it up into a few slices, and then after that, we'll divide it into cubes and then cut that in with our pastry cutter. This process will take a little while, but it's important to make sure the lard is properly cut in so we get the mixture right. You'll know it's finished when the flour looks like about the consistency of coarse breadcrumbs. So at this stage, we have some really nice consistency to it, and the way you'll know that you'll have great pie crust is if you take your kind of coarse breadcrumb texture and you pack it together into what's essentially a snowball of pie. So this is holding together great. We don't need to add any more lard. And at this point, we can get a 1/2 cup of cold water. Make sure it's cold, and we're gonna start adding that slowly into the mixture. Now this can be a little bit tricky because you wanna get the dough all made up nicely, but at the same time, you don't wanna mix it too much, otherwise your pie dough is not gonna be light and fluffy and flaky that way. So our pie dough is all ready to go, but before we go and roll it out, we're going to check on the fruit. And as we can see, it's getting nice and juicy right there. Actually a little bit too much. So what we're going to want to do is strain this off before we put it in the pie shell. If we don't, it's going to be kind of messy, it's going to get all over the oven. So we're going to drain off most of the extra liquid and just keep a little bit retaining. Now as a final thing, we're also going to add a little bit of quick rising tapioca. And that inside the oven will help it set up a bit and just make it a bit more firm so it's not going to run when you cut the pie. Just watch out that if you add too much, it's going to make the pie kind of gummy in texture, and you don't want that at all. So I'm adding a teaspoon of tapioca flour, and if you're using quick rising tapioca, about 1.5 teaspoons is right. The counter's all cleared and we're ready to roll our pie dough. I'm just going to set that to the side for a moment. And the first thing you want to do before rolling it out is spread a bit of the same flour you've been using on the counter. If you don't do that, you're going to have a nearly impossible time lifting the pie dough up when you're done. It's going to break and be a lot more difficult. You'll also want to add a bit of flour either to the rolling pin or on top of the dough you're rolling to prevent it from sticking in the same way to the counter. But be careful, if you add too much flour to the pie dough, it will dry out and become difficult to roll. The actual thickness of the pie dough you get depends entirely on taste. Just keep in mind that you don't want pie dough that's half of your pie. So the first time you roll it out, probably make it thinner than you'd expect. I probably go for about 2 or 3 millimeters thick. Now here we're going to determine the size of pie dough we need to cut off this larger block, because this is going to be enough dough for our top and our bottom of our pie. So I've flipped the pie plate over so we can see the diameter of it, but keep in mind that you need enough dough that it can sink inside to the depth of this, which is about 1 inch all the way around. So don't just do it right to the edge, otherwise your pie dough is going to sink inside and you won't have enough for a nice lip of the pie. Now using the back side of the knife here so I don't scratch the counter, I'm just going to go around our pie. Now if we floured our counter correctly, this shouldn't be too bad, but there's no fail-safe way to lift the dough off the counter. If it does rip, however, not too badly, we can always mend it a bit once it's in the pie shell. So have your pie shell nearby. We've taken the remaining dough we had left over, and we're going to roll this back out to the right thickness and make the top of the pie. For today, we're actually going to do a design in the top of a full pie top. So it really depends on the occasion you want. You can do someone's name, you can do a picture, and if we're going to make the best possible pie, we obviously need the best logo. I'm using a knife here to carefully trace in the design I want before I cut all the way through. And that'll allow me to make a couple mistakes. The easiest way to get the extra juices from the fruit is just to use a strainer. So I've taken our larger bowl that we've used for making dough before, cleared that out, and we've strained off any unnecessary juices. And keep in mind the fruit will keep most of the juice we want anyways, just stuck to it and we'll be good to go. Now we're going to load all our filling into the pie shell, and then just dot the top of it with a little bit of butter before we put the top on. We're almost done at this point. We're just going to lift the top of the pie off the counter, get it onto the pie, and we're set. Now for this part, especially if you've carved any kind of elaborate design into it, be really careful when you're lifting it off that it doesn't rip. You can always kind of mend it on the pie, but it won't look quite as good. So take your time, get it right. The last two things we're going to do here are cut off the excess pie dough around the edges and then fancy it up a little bit with a quick trick. This is a really quick trick that people are always impressed by. You just take a fork and press it down on the edge of the pie dough and go all the way around, and it goes a long way to making the pie look complete. And the last thing to do is bake it. So we're going to do it at 475 for 10 minutes, and that's just to brown the top and get it looking great. After that, rotate the pie 180 degrees, and lower the heat to 375 and bake for anywhere between 40 to 50 minutes depending on your oven. It's been about 45 minutes now. We left an extra 5 minutes just to make sure the crust was perfect. And let's take it out and have a look. At this point, we just need to wait for the pie to cool on the rack. Of course, if you're impatient, there's always ways to cool it down.